Kat. It's very nice to have you on my podcast. As a part of plenty of podcasts I'm doing in the Council of Europe. And you're a part of newly elected part of the British delegation here. What are the main things you're seeking to achieve or to pursue in Council of Europe?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's lovely to chat with you. I'm a brand new Labour MP for Stourbridge. It's in the West Midlands in England. So I was lucky enough to be elected by my colleagues to join Council of Europe. And I really saw this as an opportunity to make sure that Britain's voice is being heard in Europe in some way. Obviously, we've had Brexit. Whatever we all think about that, we can perhaps discuss that a bit more. But I think it's really important that we're occupying these spaces and getting involved in these discussions, because I think, especially in the uncertain times that we're going into with the Trump election, obviously the global conflicts that are going on as well. That
with Nigel Farage, party of Nigel Farage rising.
My goodness, I think more than ever we need unity in the continent, and that's crucial that we're here and occupying these spaces, as I said.
Makes sense. Do you think Labour has that, and particularly Keir Starmer, as he is the leader, has that unity vibe, has that opportunity for uniting people? Because on many issues, it seems like Conservative and Labour government are so torn far apart that some of the people will never vote for another party or other than the one they support.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of switch voters in this election. I think we'd had 14. Yeah, and we'd had 14 years of Conservative. So Labour were advertising change in big capital letters. So people thought, hey, all right, we'll give you a chance.
No, there is some change in policies, though.
I'm glad you can see that, Vladimir, because what our problem is, I think, because we pushed the change message so hard and people are so frustrated and exhausted by the last 14 years of the cuts and austerity, that they're expecting to see a sudden change. And I think people really need to be patient. And as you said, we are changing things, and hopefully people will start to see those changes coming through sooner rather than later. And in terms of Starmer bringing people together, I definitely think that having a calm, sensible, not very exciting character in charge is really key. I think we've had far too much personality politics with like Boris Johnson, Trump, as I just mentioned, Farage. These really exaggerated characters in politics, I think, are not helpful for anybody.
No, Conservative Party leadership is something that's definitely been under question. Maybe one of the big reasons why they lost this election is because over these years they have been changing their leadership so much, and it's just not it's not possible to achieve any result if you give a person like 1 year or two.
Absolutely. So I mean, what was it? They had about 4 chancellors in a year. Yeah. Several prime ministers. It just became a bit of a standing joke in the end.
Liz Truss.
Yeah. Don't. We're still feeling the effects of that. And I'm glad you said that, actually, because something that's being levelled at Labour right now is that our economic policies are affecting the markets. And actually, I think people need to remember that the markets are still responding to things that happened, 18 months, 2 years ago, which obviously would have been the Liz Truss crushing our economy. So there's a lot we've got to clear up, and I'm glad we started that work.
Yeah, it's interesting, different approaches. So people are obviously urging the party to change everything fast and to get the country back on its tracks. But the thing is, when you're urging the government to push for some change and to to put some money into some policy or something else, you should understand that this money has to be taken from somewhere. And okay, Labour government, it seems like, has chosen the source of this money from taxes or from tuition fees in the university, which, I mean, people have to, in my opinion, people have to choose whether they will like to fund in some way or not. So I think it's incredibly hard to raise money if you wouldn't like your taxes to be raised, if you wouldn't like tuition fees to be cut down. So of course it's unpleasant. And I'm just trying as as being trying to be neutral as much as possible. I'm just trying to assess whether there were any other ways to forge ahead.
I mean, definitely, I would really like to see a wealth tax of some sort. I think us as
You mean taxing the wealthy?
Absolutely. In fact, a suggestion my husband made recently was, he said, just apply 0.5% tax to every single bank account in the UK. And I was like, whoa. I'm not sure, babe. But I can see where he's coming from in putting it across the board. So it's not just, you're not accused of, again, the two-tier gear, which has been thrown at us about so many different things. I think you've got to be careful about not just targeting one group of people or another group of people. So while we have managed to not tax working people, although some would argue that we have by increasing national insurance contributions on employers and potential knock-on effect of that, I would like to see more being done to target the big corporations that aren't paying tax in our country, you know, the Amazons, Starbucks of this world, things like that. And also those super wealthy who are also hoarding money offshore and not paying their fair share in the UK. I would like to see that change. And I'm frankly surprised that as a Labour Party, we're not doing more on that. But I think there's been a lot of pushback from me and my colleagues across all sides of the party. So perhaps the front bench will be thinking about that in the not too distant future.
No, I think it's incredibly hard to act on that now, as a lot of billionaires, a lot of millionaires are already leaving the UK. And let's face it, taxes are pretty high. But it's definitely very hard to find a way to tax them and not make them leave, therefore, because large companies will rather base their country in some island that has zero or little to none taxes.
Well, ultimately,
and make their money here.
Yeah.
Than to pay the taxes here.
Sure, and ultimately, that's what Brexit boiled down to. It was.
In what sense?
It was a way. Because the EU was cracking down on people holding money offshore. And I believe politicians in the UK saw that this was coming in the EU and thought, well, we've got to protect ourselves. We've got our offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and stuff. We want to protect that. So obviously we had a Conservative government at the time, and David Cameron was heavily influenced by the Eurosceptics, the old Eurosceptics amongst the Conservatives. And I believe that was the sole driver for the Brexit vote, because David Cameron wanted to remain popular within the Conservative Party, and people wanted to protect their wealth as well. So while there may be many, many reasons presented as to why we had a vote on the EU, I believe that was the driver behind it. But obviously we had other issues brought into the mix to get the general public on board.
So it's incredibly hard question though, but how would you like the wealthy to be taxed? Are there any specific tax ways that you're looking into?
I mean, I'm not an economist myself, but I do feel when you've got someone who, I don't know, for example, has a billion pounds, if you're taking 0.5% or 1% of that, they're not going to even notice.
But you have to take it under some premise.
Yeah.
Or there has to be a policy
there's always going to be a threshold there as well, which I think is perhaps where my husband came up with his crackpot idea.
A bit radical, but
he's pretty radical. I mean, I'm pretty on the left, but I think he goes a little bit further than me. But I thought it was an interesting proposal that would prevent that threshold thing happening, which, as we've seen with other policies that we've taken forward that have been unpopular, particularly the winter fuel, 2-child benefit cap, there's always a threshold where someone's going to lose out, or someone that perhaps should get a benefit doesn't get it, or someone that should be paying more isn't paying more. So I'd say it would have to be really carefully thought through by people who know more intricately about the economy than perhaps I do. But I just absolutely think there's got to be more distribution of that wealth, because the gap between the poorest and the wealthiest is just widening, and I think we need to even out that playing field a little bit.
And also, don't you think that those people that earn a lot, earn the most? You mentioned Amazon. They're the largest, almost the largest contributors to the society as a whole. If we would have not had Amazon, it would have been quite hard for us to get the products, and we can't really imagine our life without Amazon. It's the same with big, large corporations that make their money, but at the same time, they might be actually contributing to the society more than they take away.
Yeah.
So if they leave, if they redirect their companies to other countries or just leave the country, it would be a massive detriment to the economy. This is my view as a Ukrainian, but
yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see where you're coming from, and Amazon has been a great thing for online shopping, but equally
we can raise questions about ethics. We can raise questions about economic disparities of people like Jeff Bezos and a random person who fixes cars or works at the hospital.
But for me, when you talk about Amazon as well, I feel that online shopping has been a really big issue with our online shopping has been a really big issue for our small towns, our high streets, and we're seeing much more businesses closing because of the rise in online shopping. I'm guilty as much as anybody else. I do really try not to use that Amazon where possible.
Why though? Because you feel like
because I feel it's unethical. As I said about that, I don't feel like they're contributing enough to our country. It's having that knock-on effect on our towns and cities, local businesses. And what I've also noticed recently is a downturn in the quality of some of the items that they're selling. We've also had a lot of issues in the UK, and I know in other countries around the way the workers are treated. And I have done some work, and colleagues have as well, with trade unions to ensure that those workers are treated fairly, because we've heard about some outrageous employment practices happening in some of their warehouses. So I think we have to look at it in the round, rather than just worrying about one little aspect of that, because it is a wider issue.
On Trump, and it very much has to do with Jeff Bezos, because Trump has surrounded himself with just massive, incredibly powerful and incredibly wealthy people who it seems like he's able to bring to his side, to carry to his side. And it's both interesting to follow this and more potentially dangerous.
And a bit terrifying.
Yeah. It seems like we have to choose from Trump owning everything and Trump making all the decisions, or Democrats making all the decisions. And it's not really the best choice, is it?
Not really. I think,
like nobody,
it's like the best, which is the best of the bad bunch sort of thing.
Nobody can say that one candidate has clearly stood up to public. If it would have been Obama running against Trump, it would have been disaster for Trump. But we don't have...
You never know what might happen in 2028. Hey?
Yeah, we don't have a candidate like Obama. And it seems like as the left has been on the decline...
well, here's something interesting.
A lot of people are moving to the right.
We know that Trump is trying to change the constitution so that he could stand for a third term.
Is he?
But that would mean that also Obama could stand. That would be fun.
It would be fun.
That would be really fun. So hey, let's hope that he does try and change that.
Interesting, yeah, interesting. I've never heard that he is trying. Although I heard in media that this might be the possibility.
There's so many things
might
that
be
are
something
coming out right now, isn't there?
Go for.
Well, obviously, I think he would want to try and stay in power as long as possible. How old is he now? 78?
78,
I think it's pretty crazy.
It's not 79.
America have such old politicians, don't they? I think I do look and think, oh my gosh, what? Retire, have a rest, let someone younger
in Ukraine,
have a go.
In Ukraine, we wanted the youngest politician possible. We had Poroshenko, Poroshenko?
Yeah.
We had Poroshenko, and people thought that, okay, enough of that. We chose Zelensky, then happened what happened. COVID, war, a lot of unfortunate circumstances that also brought not only our country to the worse situation than it was before, but also the whole of Europe, as Europe is now has to cut out trading with Russia, impose economic sanctions. So yeah, I think it's a terrifying situation we're in now.
It is, because I think, again, we're coming back to that word of unity, where even within Europe, we're still, trying to get everyone on board that we need to support, Ukraine, we need to support Belarus, we need to support Georgia.
And we're not sure whether everybody wants to get on board with us anymore.
Yeah, and that's the worry, we are seeing an increase in support for Russia. I know Trump has historically been quite good friends with Russia, and
so historically Trump has been the first president to give us lethal weapons. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
So something like HIMARS is what Trump was the first president to give us. Not Obama, who was there during Donbass, who was there during Crimea. Trump was the first one. But then, of course, Trump hasn't got, although he has now said that if Putin, if you don't end the war, you will face with plenty of more sanctions. But yes, Trump hasn't got that appearance of F.U. Putin.
He's not making those noises right now.
I mean, yeah, but I wonder at which stage is this war? At which stage has this war reached? And whether we should go more to the negotiation part rather than fighting Russia, because it seems like, unfortunately, NATO countries and the US are not trying to help us win in this case. Or maybe they are not able to help us win at the current circumstances. Maybe we're asking for much more than they are capable of delivering, but it seems like with NATO not able or willing to help us win, and with our country suffering so much economically, businesses has been killed, a lot of prices has been driven up. It seems like
it is. And
what is the way out?
And both sides have lost so many men and women and children as well.
So the question is, can we win more?
I think Ukraine can win, but I think, like you say, there needs to be a concerted effort at negotiation rather than just keep shooting at each other and killing soldiers. Because as we've seen, Russia are already importing soldiers from prisons, from North Korea, from wherever they can get.
Nobody is reacting to that, but it's actually quite significant.
It's insane.
Another country.
Yeah, another
being
country.
In this war
and another dictatorship.
And nobody cares in Europe.
As well. We do.
I mean, people care.
We care, but
people care.
but I think, there's not enough noise being made about it. Like, oh my gosh, what these poor people who have no idea, who've never left North Korea, who would never have the opportunity to leave North Korea, and then their leader just says, "Off you go, lambs to the slaughter." And meanwhile, Ukraine's men are just dropping and dropping and dropping. I mean, as I told you, I visited Ukraine in September, and we visited some of the rehabilitation hospitals, and obviously there's a much higher conscription age in Ukraine currently, isn't there? They still talking about lowering.
So it's 25.
25.
This podcast is recorded at 28th of January. Anything might change when it's out, but at the point of now, the conscription age is 25.
Yeah.
And Ukraine is talking about conscripting women, which would not mean they will have to fight with firearms, but it would mean that they will have to
drive a drone or
something like that, or help or deliver some services.
Yeah,
which is quite sad, because then who has to stay with children, who has to take care of basic home or anything, and as men are dying, how is the society supposed to function without any men?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd heard a suggestion that it might be lowered from 25 for men as well.
To 23, yeah?
Yeah, but then that's taken away the opportunities of young men in Ukraine to, have education or gain a career that will help them beyond this war when we do have victory. Because I believe we will have victory in Ukraine.
Everybody hopes so.
I do hope so. That's what we all want to see happen, and defeat Putin in his efforts across like the Balkans. I think it is a really concerning time, and while I've been here as well, we've met with Georgian opposition members, Lithuanians, people across that area who are all concerned about the influence that Russia and Putin are having, and also that we're seeing that coming through in some of our own countries as well. I've seen some pro-Russian content coming through in Britain.
I think that's more based on culture. So
I think it just shows how far that propaganda machine has reached, which is really worrying.
It's both, in my opinion, it's both. Yes, propaganda, and people on social media think they're entitled to say whatever they want, and think they're entitled to say that, well, you're a certain identity or you're a certain race, and that's why you should be disregarded in the society. Of course, it's social media, but yeah, I think there is a much larger problem rather than propaganda going on. It's the divide in the society when the social media has exacerbated our views of how we should function, to the point that me as very young man, when I speak to other young women, I will feel totally disenfranchised from their way of speaking, and they will most likely feel like I don't understand anything. And it's weird because these genders are supposed to function together.
I think it has changed the way we interact as people.
I think social media has been really a big part of it.
Definitely, and I'm quite grateful actually of my age. I look a lot younger than I am. I'll just say that now. But I grew up without a mobile phone, without the internet until about the age of 16, 17. I'm so glad that I had the opportunity, because I just see how it is affecting young people's ability to communicate. And then obviously, as you mentioned, we had COVID, and we've got a whole load of young people who still don't really know how to communicate with people because they were stuck at home for however many months or years during that time and not going,
especially if they were incredibly young. It has affected.
It has had a big impact on the social fabric of young people in particular. And again, add into that mix social media, phones, TikTok, all this rubbish, and you've just got people just living through
all this rubbish we're posting this podcast.
Hey guys, put your phones down. But I think we need to remember that these resources are really helpful if we use them in a limited and respectful and the correct way. And I think there are noises happening, especially here. There are discussions happening at Council of Europe around freedom of expression on social media and how the platforms manage misinformation, hatred, things like that, and how we balance that against everyone.
It's really hard to balance.
Really difficult, because there are some extreme views across that board. My own view, yes, freedom of speech doesn't mean that you're immune to the consequences of your freedom of speech. It
depends on where is the limit for you. It's very different to all kinds of people.
In particular in the UK, I think since we've seen the rise of reform, there are a lot more people who think that things are just around, oh, you got upset because I said this. Oh, it's just words. But we've just remembered yesterday on 27th of January, International Holocaust Memorial. The Nazis started with words. Then they started abusing people. And then we know what happened after that. So I'm really conscious that, and it goes back to me telling you one of my interests around history and heritage. We've got to remember these things so that we can learn from them. And perhaps that's where we can take some of the cues from on how we manage things like social media going forwards.
Well, Kat, it has been extremely interesting to talk to you. I'm afraid, the flow of the conversation is so nice. I don't want to stop it, but I'm afraid I have to.
No worries. Perhaps we can catch up another time.
Yeah.
No, you're so welcome.